Cannot discredit Obi, discredit his supporters instead. Welcome to the news and please subscribe to our channel. Almost 2 years ago, I watched the same movie play out almost to the letter. At the time, I was still resident in Nigeria and a nascent protest movement was getting off the ground or on the ground depending on how you look at it. NSAS was a purely youth-driven protest movement that saw the entirety of Nigerian youth across ethnic and political divides unite in pursuit of a single reasonable and achievable political goal, the end of police criminality and brutality. Naturally, the Nigerian establishment was alarmed at the new phenomenon of pan-youth political action, so it did what empires always do, it fought back. First came attempt to discredit and compromise the leaders of the movement. Quickly, it became apparent that they were in fact no leaders and the protest was every bit as decentralized as it claimed to be. No matter, because like every self-respecting establishment, the Nigerian empire saw this only as a temporary logistical setback. Different ways to kill a cat and all that. So it changed tack from trying to discredit the non-existent leaders to discrediting the entire movement as a whole. And this is where a certain group of people came into the picture. Back in the 90s when Sani Abacha was planning to transition himself into a civilian dictator by holding sham elections where he would be the sole candidate, way ahead of you, Paul Nkingali. Abacha's strategy included use of youthful provocateurs, passies and astroturfers, whose job was to either organize a false image of public love for general designer Sunshade or to provide a pretext for a crackdown on any groups opposed to his self-succession plan. One of these provocateurs was a fellow called Daniel Kanu, who led a brick-faced political action entity called Youth NST Ask for Abacha, YEAA. Kanu was the virtual opposite of all that Abacha was: young to Abacha's broodies age, Christian to Abacha's Muslim, Southeastern to Abacha's Northwestern, or so Abacha claimed anyway, and media friendly to Abacha's media-averse Menentin personnel. If he was able to stage his so-called million man march for Abacha, this would have provided a visual pretext for Abacha to claim he had widespread support and thus pushed forward with his plan despite foreign opposition. Thankfully, we never get to know how successful Kanu's scheme would have been because Abacha dropped dead unexpectedly one day in 1998, and Nigeria got a second chance. But as the rise of Segun Awosanya, alias Shegaling, Reno Mokri, and other professional astroturfers and provocateurs shows us, Kanu's legacy lives on. Take Awosanya, for example, who was able to successfully plant himself at the narrative center of NSAS by portraying himself as his convener, a nonsensical title for someone who neither started the movement nor conveyed anything in his life. Using Kanu's blueprint from the 90s, Awosanya cleverly hid his pro-regime intentions once on the street protest kicked off by pretending to be concerned about the safety of protesters. When the attempted emotional gimmickry failed, he then bared his fangs and moved on to outright blackmail, accusing protesters of being insurrectionists. For a regime that had clearly been looking for a pretext to send in the troops and reprise Tiananmen Square, this was the narrative excuse it had been waiting for, and the date October 20, 2020 has since gone down in infamy. He would later even ratchet up the blackmail by blaming the protesters for their own deaths, claiming that they soaked his hashtag in blood. Here we are in 2022, and the later day, Daniel Kanu regains our teeth yet again. This time, the target is yet another pan-Nigerian youth movement with a reasonable, achievable political goal. For those who have a functioning pair of eyes and ears, it is clear that the groundswell of support for P2B across Nigerian youth population is not necessarily even driven by P2B himself. It is actually more about what he represents in the minds of young Nigerians versus the other options presented to them. After 7 unbroken years of calamity under retired General Toothpick in Aso Rock, young Nigerians from across the entire country are clearly tired of the status quo, and P2B, whether he even agrees or not, represent a change they want. The past few months have seen completely organic youth-led displays of support for candidates to be in places like Kogi, Delta, Sokoto, and Lagos. It really does not get more diverse and broad-based than that. Unsurprisingly, many have drawn parallels with NSAS, leading to the also unsurprising attempt by the Nigerian Empire to reprise the scripts used on innocent young Protestants against innocent young voters. The cast and crew are almost the same as the last time, in fact. Once again, the youth of the country are on one side, while the self-styled convener of NSAS is on the other, ably assisted by the Wendell Slimming, or Reno Mokri as he sometimes chooses to be known. Just like the antecedents from the 90s and in 2020, those two provocateurs, a thoroughly undistinguished real estate agent and a preacher who was once a media aide for a one-term president, have busily set about the task of gaslighting, strategic dishonesty, and portray themselves, gaslight, strategic dis and narrative blackmail to portray themselves as somehow important in the ongoing conversation, and to typecast candidates obese granular of organic support as some sort of violent insurrection that needs to be put down. The poorly disguised campaign of dog whistling recently went to the extent of paying for Awosanya to get a full-page color interview in a major daily newspaper, as though this was someone who has any actual political capital worth dedicating political newsprints inches to. The difference this time, though, is that the likes of Awosanya and Omokri have vastly underestimated the extent to which young Nigerians have been frustrated and pushed to the wall over the past 7 years. If they imagine that they will have their way by appealing to a non-existent, contrived standard of political discourse which they themselves do not adhere to, they are making the same mistake that Daniel Kano made in 1998, the mistake of overestimating themselves and their own importance in the larger scheme of things. Young Nigerians who want to change from the status quo have vocally chosen candidates Obi as their vehicle. Sometimes, even to his visible abashment, by and large, do not really care what a realtor with dyed hair and a randy delinquent dad think about their electoral choices. It is also impossible to call in the army to massacre P2B supporters because they are too geographically dispersed and numerous for any kind of crackdown to be logistically feasible. The latter day Daniel Kanos are fighting a lost war, but they do not seem to have realized it yet. Ultimately, two things will emerge from between each of the free election. What will determine the outcome will have exactly nothing to do with the malicious attempt by dishonorable people to smear an entire movement after failing to land death on its designated leaders. And young Nigerians have decided what they want. Even if they do not get it next year, it is only going to be a matter of time now, which means the likes of Awosanya and Omokri time is running out. This is a very beautiful piece. Okay, on this note, we have come to the end of a new